Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying our conference today. I want to add my welcome to the welcomes you've received before. My name is Greg Gardner. I work in the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. And today I want to introduce our luncheon keynote speaker, our great speaker. Before we do that, I want to talk about one slide. And I don't think it's up yet. There we go. That's better than looking at me. I've never seen myself so big before. Anyway, Chris wants you all to know this was a slide that she wanted to make sure got emphasized. The bottom line is, in Gombe, we eat our own dog food. I hope that doesn't ruin your appetite, but we've been applying and we take seriously applying the concepts of the success framework. We've been able to, what this chart represents is we've been able to, through applying those concepts and principles, we've been able to reduce our FTEs. We've been able to take 7 of those FTEs from the budget area and apply them to operations and then continue the budget work with fewer FTEs. So this represents us taking seriously. We wouldn't ask you to do anything that we wouldn't do ourselves. So we eat our own dog food. Well, it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce our great keynote speaker, Rami Goldratt. Rami currently serves as the CEO of Goldratt Group, the leading organization in the theory of constraints implementations. Over the years, Rami has been involved in consulting engagements with retail, automotive, textile, chemical, and service industries all around the world. He's considered one of the most influential leaders of the theory of constraints body of knowledge, is highly regarded for developing the TOC applications in sales and marketing. His groundbreaking implementations in this area have become the standard in TOC sales. Rami was also among the pioneers in developing and implementing TOC applications for the education system, guiding hundreds of teachers around the world in applying TOC thinking processes for children's education. We had the opportunity to eat dinner with him last night, and I know that helping children use these TOC thinking processes is near and dear to his heart. Well, we're lucky to have Rami in Utah. He's a world-class expert in the theory of constraints, and the theory of constraints is really the foundation of the success framework. All those concepts that we apply to improve our systems, like knowing our goal, setting ambitious targets, identifying the constraint, using the 5 focusing steps, finding hidden capacity, developing a full kit, cause and effect thinking. I can go on, but I better stop there or he won't have time. All of these ideas come from the theory of constraints. So we appreciate his work to be here today. We appreciate his coming all the way from Israel to be the first time he's been in Utah. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Rami Goldratt.
Pleasure. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello? You with me? I always thought it's a challenge to talk after lunch, but during lunch, that's the first time for me, so we'll see how it goes. So thank you very much for inviting me, Governor Herbert, dear Kristen, all of you, to share some insights on the theory of constraints and how it may enable you to achieve better results, more results in your operations. When Kristen asked me to come and present, I asked her, sure, it will be my honor, what would you like me to talk about? And she said, why won't you just, summarize what TOC is? Many people will not know. Share some insights on the applications TOC has in the various industries that we work in and how it can be applied in service industries, in government. Share some new developments. And I said, oh, thank you very much. I regret I asked you. Now, but seriously, how do I summarize 40 years of continuous development of this body of knowledge applied in such a various industries across the world How do I share it with you in 1 hour? So I decided, rather than go over the development of the theory and share with you examples of how it applied in business and in service sectors and in governments, I decided to share with you probably the latest work that my father was working on. My father is the initiator of the theory of constraints. I cannot refer to him by any other way, just besides calling him my father because of the Jewish tradition. We are not allowed to call our parents by their first name or formal names. It's disrespectful in Jewish tradition. So the only way I can refer to him is by calling him my father. So I decided to share with you my father's latest work, and literally what he was working on in the last month of his life. He passed away 4 years ago. And what he was focusing on was working on a subject called management attention. You can just put on the presentation, or do I click here, or how do we turn it on? Ah, here we go. Management attention. How many of you agree with me that management attention is a critical resource? Raise your hand, please. Everybody. Now, let's understand what do we mean when we refer to a resource as a critical resource. We actually mean two things. The first meaning is this resource is essential for the system to achieve whatever goals the system has. Do you agree? Okay? Of course, if it's not essential, we will not refer to it as critical. The second meaning is that we always feel we do not have enough of it. We need more. Because if it's essential and you have enough of it, it's again not going to be referred to as critical. Do you agree intuitively? So management attention is both essential and we feel we don't have enough of it in order to achieve whatever goals that we aim to achieve. So if all of you raised your hand when I said do you think it's a critical resource, and it means that it's so important yet we feel we don't have enough of it, maybe we should devote some time to think, are we really exploiting this critical resource in the right way? Are we really managing it in the right way to achieve results? Let's devote at least 1 hour during my speech in order to think if we're addressing it in the right way. So in order to start, let's define it. What do we mean what do we mean by management attention? And I will define it in a very simple way. I will first ask a simple, straightforward question, which is, why do we need managers? You are all managers, I assume. Why do we need you? Why does the system need you as managers? Well, the simple answer is we need management because we know the system will not achieve its objectives on its own merit. It's not a plug-and-play machine. Agree? That's why we need managers. Now, if I would have a long discussion with you about all the challenges, constraints, and obstacles that we have that prevents the system from achieving its objectives on its own merit, we will probably reach the conclusion that we have 3 major challenges, 3 major obstacles, and to manage these obstacles is why we need managers, basically. And these 3 obstacles or challenges are the following. First, complexity. There are so many different factors that interact that we need to manage, we need to synchronize for the system to achieve its objectives. The more factors that we need to synchronize, the more the interactions, the higher the complexity, the higher the need for management. Do you agree? Hello? You know, you can stop chewing from time to time. The second obstacle is uncertainty. Okay, we do not know exactly what will be the demand placed on our resources in the future. It can go up suddenly. We do not know exactly what is the rate of performance of whatever resources that we employ in order to achieve our objectives. The resources have variabilities. There is great uncertainty that we need to manage. The higher the uncertainty, the higher the need for management. Agree? And yes, there is a lot of uncertainty that we need to manage. There is a lot of complexity that we need to manage. That's why we hire you. That's why we have management. Now let's achieve results. And the third obstacle is conflicts. We love harmony. We wish that our environment would be harmonious. Everything is aligned. Unfortunately, there is harmony and there is reality. And in reality, things are not as harmonious as we would like, correct? We face many times a lot of conflicts between stakeholders, conflicts between requirements that we need to manage in order to achieve the objectives, like we talked a lot about cost and quality, for example. So we need managers in order to be able to manage these conflicts and still achieve the results. Agree? So management attention basically is our capacity to achieve results dealing with complexity, uncertainty, and conflicts. The better we do it, the better we exploit management attention. Would that be a fair definition for you? So now let's move forward and ask ourselves, are we doing the right thing? Are we exploiting correctly our management attention? In TOC, the theory of constraints, whenever we take a subject matter, like for example a company or a social organization, or a field, a knowledge field like management attention, whenever we take a subject matter and we ask ourselves, how can we improve it? We ask three questions. Three questions that deal with change. Why? My father said, every improvement is a change. Every improvement is a change. Agree? Well, not every change is an improvement, and this we all know very well and have a lot of experience, but every improvement is a change. Therefore, if we want to make an improvement, we need to ask three questions that deal with change. The first question is, what to change? Notice that we do not ask why to change. Every system must be on a process of ongoing improvement. Nevertheless, not everything should be changed. Definitely. Many times we change things that are not going to make a big impact, or we change it in a way that actually deteriorates the system performance. Not everything should be changed. But if we want to have continuous improvements, we need to change something. What is it? What to change? When we ask what to change, we want to make sure that we touch the leverage point or the constraint, the focal point of the system that we know really governs and dictates the ability of the system to generate goal units, whatever is the goal. We want to make sure we do not deal with symptoms, but rather deal with the core challenge, the underlying cause. Because if we deal with symptoms, any solution we will put will be temporary. Agree? We don't deal with the cause. More than that, when you deal with symptoms, there is a very high risk and very likely risk that any solution you will put in place to deal with one set of symptoms will, even if you manage to solve them, will create negative ramifications in other parts of the system because you're not dealing with the core cause. Have you seen it before? That you deal with one set of undesirable effects, but the solutions you put in place enhance other problems in other places of the system? You've seen it? That's why when we ask what to change, we want to make sure we deal with the core cause. The second question is what to change to? What's the direction for the solution? How do we make sure the solution we put in place will not be good for the short term, but very bad for the long run, or vice versa? Will be a good solution for the long run, but in the short term will bring a lot of chaos to the system. We want to make sure that the solution we put in place will not replace one set of problems with another set of problems. Agree? Now, even if we have done a very good job in defining the right problem, the core problem, and if we have done a very good job in defining the right solution, the one that will not just replace one set of problems with another, this is not the end of the journey. There is one last very important question that honestly, in our experience, we many times ignore. And the third question is how to cause the change. Notice the way my father verbalized it. How to cause the change, not how to change, but how to cause the change. Why it's so important to understand it? Because even if we have done a good job to define the right problem and the right solution, many times good solutions to the right problems fail. and they fail because they were not introduced properly to the system. And rather than creating collaboration, because they are the right solutions to the right problems, rather than getting collaboration, what we get is conflicts and resistance, simply because we did not give enough thought of how to introduce it properly to the system. So 3 questions: how to cause the change, what to change to, and how to cause the change. These are 3 questions that we continuously ask ourselves on any subject matter that we want to improve. And we want to make sure we have good answers to these questions before we start the journey. Otherwise, we'll face obstacles that are self-created just because we didn't prepare homework right. So, my friends, let's ask the 3 fundamental questions on the subject matter of management attention. What to change? What to change to? And how to cause the change. Would that be interesting for you? I hope I don't bother you while you are chewing your lunch so much. So, let's ask these 3 questions, and starting with what to change. Usually it's an easy starting point because we all love to complain and like to share problems. In Israel, where I'm coming from, we have a very common joke that says, why does the Israeli child, why does it start to talk only when he is 3 years old? Do you know why? Because until then he had nothing to complain about. So we all love to complain. Let's start with complaining. What to change? What are our problems? Here are some set of problems I assume, from your environment. Let's just quickly go through them. Federal funding agencies require reporting plans and their own sets of measures. Stakeholders and advocacy groups have different agendas, issues, and approaches, demands of running multiple programs, all of which have unique goals, missions, purposes, audits that recommend endless tasks that should be addressed. State legislators are constantly introducing new bills, ideas, and budget and changes, and I'm sure that if I would have opened this for discussion, we could have filled the slide with many more demands and conflicts and challenges that are consuming your management attention, correct? But are these representative enough? Can I go along with this? Now, I'm not claiming to be an expert in government efficiencies, not at all. Actually, most of what I work on, by the way, I love, Kristen, the way you defined operations, converting goal into reality. Basically, most of my life, I was the head of operations of my father, okay, helping him to convert his goal into reality. And most of what we are doing is working with businesses around the world, Japan, India, China, US, of course, North America, Brazil, Europe, in various industries. I'm not claiming to be an expert in government. I just want to give you several tips and the way TLC think about in better addressing this management attention and how do we solve these problems and many more. So the first thing is, okay, I acknowledge all these symptoms, all these problems. Let's not try to address them one thing at a time. To try and address one problem at a time is many times a mistake because it will force you to deal with symptoms. Before you go and address one problem at a time, make sure you really understand the core problem, the core cause underlying all the symptoms. Then understand what is the direction of a solution, and then you can start aligning the solution for the various parts of the system. What to change? Looking for the core conflict at the base of the undesirable effects in our reality. That's the TOC approach. Notice that I switched the terminology, and rather than saying core cause, I called it core conflict. Why? Because we believe that if you have a fundamental problem that is lasting for a long time, probably people try to solve it by now. People do not ignore their problems. So if you have a fundamental problem that lasts for a long time, there is likely an underlying conflict that prevents us from solving this problem. That any solution we come up with for this problem conflicts with other requirements we need to do. That's why usually we define in TOC core problems as conflicts. core conflicts. Now, what I will do now, if you don't mind, I will switch and share with you the way we address it in the business environment, working with many companies, and hopefully do it in a relevant manner for you and encourage you to start to think how these concepts relate to government and to your environment. So I started with some undesirable effects and symptoms in the government world. Let me switch to business. As I mentioned, we work with multiple companies worldwide from various segments: retail, production, consumer goods, engineering, you name it, service, financials, we work with. And we see many challenges that consume management attention. Let me just name a few, and I'm sure you will relate to this. For example, should we launch a new product, or should we delay the introduction of the new product? We want to be innovative. We want to make sure we maintain our market share. It's time to launch a new product. But every time we launch a new product, there will be great effects on the sales of the existing products, right? And there is a lot of attention and resources that will be required to support this new product. So maybe we should delay it. Should we reduce the price, or should we, in order to win the order, or should we protect the margin and make sure that we have good profit? You know this conflict, I'm sure. Should we build up stock to ensure availability, or should we control the capital, because stock requires a lot of money, obviously? By the way, this problem of stock management is becoming more and more extreme as time progresses, because our ability to make accurate forecasts and projections on sales of products is simply impossible in today's market world. There are too many new products introduced. We're working with very, very wide ranges of options that we offer to consumers, and this inhibits our ability to make accurate forecasts. So we cannot use forecasts. Should I increase inventory? Should I control the inventory? Should we introduce the new system? But it always creates chaos, so maybe we should stay with the current system. It took us such a long time and investment to institute it. Many companies that we work with are involved in projects. Their environment is similar to a multi-project environment. If there is something we all know about projects, there is always going to be a need to make some changes in the plan. Do you agree? Many of you involved in projects. Have you ever seen a project that there was no change in the plan? No, right? We always need to make changes. It's either because the clients or the customers are asking, or the boss, or some conflict that we have ignored when we made the plan, or resources are not available, whatever. We need to make changes. Should we make the changes or stick to the plan? Because we all know when we make the changes, most likely there will be implications on the budget, there will be implications on the time frame to complete the project. Should we increase capacity, add more resources, build another plant, add more people? Or should we reduce the investment? You know, we said there is a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what will be the demand on our resources. Should we reduce operating expense? A lot of you heard today talk about cost. Should we reduce cost? But you know, in most businesses, costs are people, salaries. So to reduce costs and really make it meaningful, it means layoffs. That's not something good. We don't want to do that. And I can fill the board with more and more and more conflicts, but I think these are representative enough. Now, as I mentioned, when we ask what to change, we do not try to tackle the problem one at a time, because any solution to any one of these problems will have implications on the other problems. Let's try to understand the core conflict. And I will share with you now the core conflict that any company has. Of course, when we do the analysis for a specific company or a business, we tailor it to their environment. But now let me talk generically on every company. And let's start with the goal, the objective, which is to be a successful company. What it means to be a successful company is a long discussion that we are not going to have now, obviously. What does it mean to provide more value to stakeholders, more value to customers, more value to employees? What does it mean may be different from different companies? Let's just put it aside, and rather than going to this definition, talk about two necessary conditions that any company must fulfill in order to be successful. The first one is in order to have a successful company, we must ensure the long-term prosperity of the company. Do you agree? We must. We cannot say, let me just worry about today. Even though all the pressures are about today, we have to take care of the future. Make sure we continue to grow in the future. This means that we need to focus on long-term health of the company. For example, it means we need to make investments. Investments in R&D, investments to increase capacity. We need to make investments. Another example of long-term health is we need to allow protective capacity. Now, protective capacity is a term that we use in TOC. Let me explain. Protective capacity basically is a buffer. We do not know what will be the demand placed on our resources in the future. We do not know if the current resources will continue to perform at the current rate. We need a buffer to protect us if we worry about the future, if we want to continue and do better in the future. Do you agree? Okay, and we have to allow protective capacity. Another example, we need to focus on profit. For example, remember, reduce the price, don't reduce the price. If that's what we care about, our answer will be, do not reduce the price. Who knows what will be the impact on the profit in the future? That's very nice, very simple, but that's not the whole story. In order to have a successful company, we need more things, and one of them will be to ensure smooth current performance. We must make sure we have stability now. No chaos. Now, to ensure the smooth current performance, we need to focus on current operations, not on future. For example, making investments, what are you, crazy? We need to cut back on cost. Allow protective capacity. What are we, in academia now? Allow protective capacity. It's nice in the books. In reality, we need to maximize the efficiencies of any resource to the maximum. We cannot have the luxury of buffers. What are you talking about? Focus on profit? Of course we need to focus on profit. Totally agree. But next month profit, please. Not, don't talk to me 2 or 3 years down the road. Next month, get the order. Hello? I know you're not from companies, or many of you are mostly in governments, but do you agree? Do you relate to this problem? That's a fundamental problem that any company has. And, you know, here's my first tip. Exploiting management attention. In order for you to start thinking about it, the first thing you need to do is to ask yourself, what is the core conflict of my system? The one that I'm managing. What is the core conflict? Because until you define the core conflict, any solution you put in place most likely will deal with symptoms. With the one that demand a lot of attention from you. I agree, that's why our tendency is to run and deal with symptoms. But you first need to take a deep breath and do the analysis to find the core conflict. Here's the core conflict for companies. What it is for government, we need to think together. By the way, which side is more important? Stability or growth? Stability or what is more important? Impossible to answer. Both. It's like asking you what is more important, to breathe or to eat. Obviously now I say it's to eat, but right? You need both. Because we're not talking about the temporary snapshot. I'm talking about the ongoing well-being of the organization. We need both. In which side of the conflict do you think most organizations are? On stability, focusing on the now, or on the future, on the growth? Well, some of you will say now, and some of you will say growth, and both of you are right. By the way, many times when we work with a specific company, it depends who you ask in the company, and he will tell you if they are focusing on growth or stability. Because most companies are in oscillations. There is only so much time that you can focus on one side of this conflict before the pressure on the other side of the conflict builds up and forces you to swing. Most companies are in oscillations. The tougher the oscillations, the more extensive the oscillations, A very clear indicator for it is what we call the harmony indicator in the company. The tension, the conflicts between the subsystems, the well-being of the employees. The tougher the oscillations, the less the harmony. Okay, I will let you think about it on your own. Why, when we don't solve a core conflict and we just keep oscillating between the two extremes, the harmony of the system goes down. People start to give up, basically. No matter what they do, they are getting blamed. So what should be the solution? Okay, first, what is the conflict for your environment? We're not going to discuss it now. It's just a challenge that I'm asking you to think of. What is the solution? What is the direction for the solution for this conflict? Because that's the first important thing to define when we ask, how do we exploit management attention? Right? Because I'm not talking about the individual manager. I'm talking about the management of the organization as a whole. We have to understand what's the direction of the solution. In order to answer it, I will first present you with the most fundamental process of the theory of constraints, the one that is presented in the book that all of you have received, the book The Goal. And the fundamental process, Kristen have done a marvelous job to present it this morning, is called the 5 focusing steps. Step number 1, identify the system's constraint. Now be careful, constraint is not anything that blocks us from achieving the goal, because then there are many, many obstacles, many, many constraints. When we say constraint in TOC, we look for the leverage point. The one thing that really will dictate to what extent we can achieve the goal units. The ultimate constraint, if you want, the core constraint. Identify it. I heard a wonderful lecture by the prisons just before this lunch, and they defined the constraint as the time, or let's call it the quality time or touch time of the officer. Okay, true or not, probably true, I don't know the business, but this is the constraint. Identify it. Many times you feel there are so many constraints. You feel the bottleneck is continuously moving. Do you agree? You've seen it? Overcome the tendency to define many constraints. If the bottleneck continues to move, it's because of the way we manage the system that force the bottleneck to move. Think carefully what really dictates the performance of your system, whatever it is. Identify it. The step number 2 is exploit. Decide how to exploit the system constraint, how to get the maximum from the current capacity of the constraint. That's where many of you have heard the concept of hidden capacity. This is capacity that the constraint has today, it's just wasted. Either by doing non-critical assignments, assignments that do not really leverage the capacity of the constraint, or by basically having the constraint idle due to the way it's synchronized with non-constraints that force them to wait for their work. Decide how to exploit the system constraint. Third, subordinate everything else to the above decision. Now that you defined what is your constraint, what the constraint should do, what it should be focusing on, then you need to think how I'm going to align all the other parts of the system to enable the constraint to do the maximum that it can. Step number 4, elevate the system constraint, add more capacity when you can. And the 4th step is do not allow inertia to become the constraint. The constraint can move, be careful. Always open your eyes and look at the non-constraints and ask yourself, are they going to become a constraint or not? So this is the theory. Let's apply it on management attention. Identify the system constraint. We said management attention because we talk about this subject field. What does it mean to exploit it? What does it mean to exploit management attention? Now remember, I'm in the context of sharing with you what we do with companies, and then hopefully together you can relate it to your environment. So in companies, decide how to exploit the system constraint means, first of all, focusing on the core conflict. By the way, this is the same for you. Whatever the core conflict is, Let's focus on solving it. Anytime our activity is focused or decision is focused on something that enables us to solve the core conflict, it means we are exploiting effectively the management attention. When we are dealing with other assignments, even if they are urgent or important, we are not exploiting management attention. We're in a loop. In the context of companies, we said, well, solving the core conflict means bringing ongoing stability and ongoing growth. What does it mean? Now, I will make a very strong claim, and that's what we do with companies, first of all, because if we are not doing it first of all, we are most likely going to waste management attention of the company. What does it mean to bring ongoing stability and ongoing growth for a company? My claim is there is only one way for companies to have ongoing growth and ongoing stability. And it's not a silver bullet. You can do it and then it can suddenly stop. You have to continuously give attention how to do it. Only one way, and as long as companies do it, they solve the core conflict and they thrive. And the moment they stop doing it, they go back into the oscillations, start losing harmony, and may disappear. What is this way for companies? The only way to bring ongoing stability and ongoing growth is by building, capitalizing, and sustaining a competitive edge. That's the only way in business world. To build, to capitalize on, and to sustain a competitive edge. Sounds trivial? Very difficult to do, of course. But how many times we see that the management attention in the company is devoted to do tasks that have nothing to do with either building or capitalizing or sustaining the competitive edge of the company. Nothing to do with it. Working on other things. Now, what does it mean for government is something we need to think together. And it starts with defining the core conflict. But before I go there, I want to give some more clarity on how we define building a competitive edge, because I think there will be some relevance for you. What does it mean for a company to build a competitive edge? How to go about it? I will start with a very significant, I believe, definition of my father, a definition for value. And he said the following: value is created by removing a significant limitation for the customer in a way that was not possible before and to the extent that no significant competitor can deliver. I'll give you a moment to read it, because I think there is a lot of relevance for not only for companies here. Value is created by removing a significant limitation for the customer in a way that was not possible before and to the extent that no significant competitor can deliver, at least for a while, because any competitive edge is temporary. Do we know what is the limitation that we would like the company to be dedicated to remove? Many times the answer is no. And that's the first thing of wasting management attention. You see, the focal point is unique value, not comparison to competitors. Don't ask yourself as a starting point, who is my competitor, how better he is or worse than he is on various parameters. It's important, but that comes later. The first thing is, what unique value am I able or I want the company to deliver to whom? And it means to define the significant limitation that we want to help customers to remove. The concept of limitation is fascinating because people learn to live with their limitations. All of us, we learn to live with our limitations to the extent that many times we do not even acknowledge them as limitations. These are just facts of life. In every society, you will have most citizens are good citizens, and then you will have the criminals, and let's just send them to prisons, for example. That's a fact of life. We don't regard it at all as a limitation that can be removed, maybe, if we change our behavior, for example. Building a competitive edge means building the capabilities to provide exceptional value, identifying the significant limitations you want to remove for the customers, and building the capabilities to remove it. Capitalizing on it means developing the offers, the sales process, in order to do more and more, to remove more and more of this limitation. And sustaining it means basically developing the competitive edge, the next one, by the time your competitors copy. Now, of course, government is not in a very competitive environment like business. This is not competition. You know, when we had dinner last night, one of the subjects we discussed was the differences between business world and government world, and Kristen said, you know, in business world, on one hand, it's very difficult because you have the competition all the time. And my answer was, you know, but in business, there is something that is much more easy relative to government. It's much easier to define the goal unit. It's profit. What it is in government. That's much more challenging than competition for me. Now, it still relates to providing unique value to society. But how do you measure it when you cannot measure it by profit? This is not the goal. What is the direction for solution for your organization? First, what is the core conflict? Then, what is the way to solve it? Only then you will be able to start asking yourself, how do I align management attention to do more and more of it? Am I coming across? I hope it's still relevant. Hello? I hear less chewing noises, so either you finished or you're interested, so I don't know. Okay. I want to go to the third step, subordinate everything else to the above decision. And start, first of all, by explaining a word here. Notice the word subordinate. Now, my father was very, very picky on the words that he used. Every word counted. Why did he use the word subordinate? It's a very violent word, subordinate. He didn't use the word align, synchronize, you know, the harmony words that basically is what we want. Subordinate. Use force, basically. Why? He used this word because we know that there are fundamental mechanisms in every organization that will work against your decision to exploit the constraint. So even if you have done a good job to identify the core conflict and the constraint and the way to solve it and what does it mean to exploit it, even if you gave the time and you have a good definition, there will be some fundamental mechanisms in the organization, in any organization, business or government, any system, that will work against your decision to exploit the constraint, to exploit your management attention. And you need to subordinate. You need to use force. Yes, it's not just about harmony, etc. To make sure these do not come in your way. Here I would like to share with you a personal story, going back to the work that my father was starting to work in his last month of his life. I have on the slide here a quote. The quote says the following: "There are fundamental mechanisms which greatly waste and distort management attention." By fundamental, he means that they exist in every organization. This is a quote taken from a new book, a book that is called The Science of Management, that my father started to write. You see, about a month before he passed away, I went with him to, my father had lung cancer. I went with him to the specialist, the oncologist, and my father had, in this intimate meeting, he had a very special question that obviously you would assume a patient will ask. And he asked the doctor, "Listen, doctor, it's very important for me to know how much time do I have? I really need to know." And the doctor told him, "Look, we don't know, it's all statistics. What good will it do to you if I will tell you the statistics? It will not do you any good because you don't know how your body will react to the treatment. Maybe you will be the one that makes it. You just need to believe that you're going to fight it and you're going to make it, and the hell with statistics. And my father said, I appreciate your answer, and I agree with the line of thought. You don't need to worry. I'm a visionary person. I'm very optimistic. Anyone that knows me will tell you that I'm going to fight it. There are thousands of companies worldwide applying my methods. I'm asking you this question not because of despair. I'm asking you this question because I decided to continue live my life exactly the way I was before we discovered what I have, but I understand that I need to prioritize things different. For example, I would like to write a new book, The Science of Management, that talks about the core conflict that organizations have, the ultimate constraint of management attention, and how it should be exploited. And I need to know if I have enough time to complete it, because if not, I will do other things. And you need to understand TOC is applied also in many, many hospitals around the world. And so my father is quite a known figure in hospitals, in healthcare, not only in businesses. By the way, many doctors or hospital administrators, they used to tell my father, you know, flow of work and improving flow of work is essential for our organization as well. The only difference is that in our organization, the work in process are patients. And the major difference is that when the work in process is standing in queue, it's also complaining a lot. So that's the major difference we have. And when we say we are not saying execute the job also. Anyway, the doctor, of course, known my father, so he told him, listen, Dr. Goldratt, please go ahead, write your book. We together going to make it happen. It's very important for us to read your next book. Go ahead. Unfortunately, my father managed to write only the introduction to the book, The Science of Management. We actually recorded him by his bed reading this introduction, a page and a half. If you want to listen to this recording, you can just go ahead on YouTube and write The Science of Management, Goldratt. You will see the recording there. And I want just to highlight, in order to end the presentation, the key message in this introduction, because that's where he starts to elaborate, and that's where this quote is taken from, the fundamental mechanisms that greatly distort and waste management attention. Greatly waste means that it causes us to focus on the wrong things, not the ones that are really aiming to solve the core conflict. And distort means that even when we are focusing on the right things, the output, our decisions, many times are not what is good for the organization as a whole. So if you want to understand TOC, you need just basically to understand the three fundamental mechanisms and how you should go about it. Of course, I have 5-10 minutes, something like that, right? How much time do I have? Anybody? Let me just go ahead, I'll assume 5 to 10 minutes, don't worry. And then it will make 15, don't worry. So, let me just go very quickly about these mechanisms, and any one of you who is interested to know what TOC has to offer differently, remember, what to change. I will encourage you to go ahead and learn. Start with reading the book, The Goal, that we shared. So the first fundamental mechanism, the way my father defined it, was the fear of complexity. Remember, complexity, many different factors that interact with each other that we need to manage. And he said, the fear of complexity drives us to dissect the system to subsystems and drive damaging local optima. In what way? We have such a high degree of complexity. We cannot make fast decisions. What do? Let's simplify the system. How do we simplify it? Let's dissect the system to subsystems and create the various departments, and every department will have the various units, and every unit will have the various groups. I don't know how it's called in your government, but you have subsystems and subsystems and subsystems, right? Hello? And now, what do we do in order to manage it better? We set for each subsystem its measures and goals. Agree? Trying to maximize the performance of the subsystem. Now, obviously, you get accountability by doing it, and you try to manage complexity by doing it, but there are some devastating negative effects for this phenomena. When many times, what is good for the subsystem in order to maximize its performance, according to the measurements that you've gave it, will not be good for the organization as a whole. We call it damaging local optima. Have you come across such a thing? Yeah? We are the one that placed this measurement. What do we want? You cannot complain. You cannot blame people for following the measurements that you gave them. Right? As my father said many times, tell me how you measure me and I will tell you how I will behave. If you measure me in an illogical manner, don't complain about illogical behavior. That's what he said. So many times, the local measurements we give to the subsystem will not, even if it's good for the subsystem, will not be good for the system as a whole. Many times, there will be conflicts between subsystems, between the local optima of subsystems. How should you manage complexity in a different way? According to TOC, the way is to identify the intrinsic flow of value or of work and identify the constraints and then aligning all the flow to maximize the constraints. That's a whole field that we're not going to go into now. But the one thing I'm telling you, for sure, even if you have done a good job in defining the core conflict and the way to solve it, and you say we need to focus on this, there will be local measurements of your subsystem that will stand in your way. And you need to identify them and change them. The next thing is the fear of unknown, of uncertainty, which drive us to manage the system by finer and finer detailed resolution, detailed projections, optimizing within the noise. I heard many of you talking about these too many measurements, too many projections, too many budgets, thinking that everything can be planned and we can impose certainty on uncertainty just by having very detailed planning and budgets. Have you ever seen a plan that stays the same it is without need to change it? It's always we need to change, right? You cannot solve certainty by imposing certainty, by thinking that highly detailed plan and projections and budgets will solve it. Never. Actually, it creates huge distortions. For example, many times when we create detailed plan, like a project plan, we need to know how much time each task will take in the project, up front when we plan the project, as if somebody has a crystal ball in a highly uncertain environment of a project, we know exactly how much time each task will take. Of course, it's rubbish. We can never tell. But we need to do it for the planning. Now, what resources will do, when you ask them for time projections, of course, they will incorporate safety, buffers, when they give you the estimation. True or not? Of course, in order to be reliable. What distortion it creates? If you know anything about project environment, you know one thing. The moment the buffer is given, it will be used. Agree? Hello? It will be used, not because people are bad. Many times because people know that if they will give back the buffer, they will not going to get it next time. If you put the buffer in the plan, it will be used if you need it or not. Consciously or not, by the way. Huge distortions. Trying to fix budgets, plans, often results in waste and distortions. The last mechanism, just to wrap up, the fear of a tug of war, of a balancing act, of a conflict. This brings us to try and solve conflicts by looking for a compromise, an optimization, a balancing between the requirement and the conflicting requirement. Now, if we can live with the compromise, there is nothing bad about it. That's fine. Unfortunately, for many, many conflicts, especially fundamental conflicts, there is no such thing as an amicable compromise. It's just a mask, trying to mask the real conflict. Any optimization point or a balancing point that you will find is just another name for a bad compromise that still force people in reality to live with the oscillations between the conflicting requirements. The most fundamental, one of the most fundamental pillars of TOC is There are no conflicts in reality. They are all a product of our assumptions about reality. My father used to say, there are no conflicts about reality. I admit, a very strange thing for a married person to say. But no conflicts in reality. Of course we live with conflicts, but it's not coming from reality. It's coming from the way we view reality, or we plan reality, or we make reality to be. Solve the conflict. You don't know how? Focus on your attention in solving it. Believe it's possible. Conflicts are not a product of God. He didn't create the world with conflicts. We brought it in. So, exactly how it's applied in your organization and government, that's why we encourage you to learn TOC and how we go about it. Just trying to solve conflicts by compromises often intensifies the conflict, increase the oscillations, not solving it. I would like to end my speech not by sharing how this is applied in all the environments, etc. This is, I'm sure Kristen's staff will share it with you later on, but providing you with 2 additional quotes of my father, which I believe are essential when we talk about management attention. The first quote is taken from the book The Goal, and the quote is the following: productivity is meaningless unless you define what your goal is. How can we talk about improving efficiency or productivity if we do not know what is the goal? What is the goal units? Agree? You must understand what is the conflict goal. You don't know? One of the methods we use is, maybe before we define the goal, let's understand the core conflict. The solution for the core conflict will become your goal units. For example, in the case of companies, to what extent we are building, capitalizing, or sustaining a competitive edge. Everybody with me? Productivity is meaningless unless you define what your goal is. The next quote is more tactical, but this is something very practical that you can start applying tomorrow, each one for his own domain. And the quote is the following: focusing on everything is synonymous with not focusing on anything. Many times my father used to say, focus starts by defining what not to do, what to stop doing. Because anywhere we will look, we will find that we can do things better. It doesn't mean we need to do it. Focus on everything is like saying we're not focusing on anything. Practical for tomorrow. If you are in a situation that we define as bad multitasking, which means that you need to switch from one task to another, from one project to another, without completing any of the tasks, this means that you placed yourself in a situation where you're focusing on too many things, which means not focusing on anything. Before you define your goal and the conflict and where you should do, before you do that, the first thing I will tell you to do if you're in a bad multitasking, have the courage to say what I'm stopping to do from tomorrow. I will get to it, just not now. Let me first complete the other assignments. This is you can do tomorrow. You're not a victim. Don't come and tell me, but everybody will come and shout and scream. Think how to do it. Everything will be done faster. If you are in a bad multitasking, you first define what to stop doing. And then you will get to it. Just not now, only when you finish. I hope this was interesting for you. I hope the subject of management attention, which is very dear to my heart because it's a critical resource, is something that you will leave this room thinking about. You all agreed when I said, is it critical resource? Are we exploiting it in the right way? Thank you very much.